Welcome, everybody, to today's hybrid hearing. Pursuant to House rules, some members will appear in person and others will appear remotely via WebEx. Since some members are appearing in person, let me first remind everyone that pursuant to the latest guidance from the House attending physician, all individuals attending this hearing in person must wear a face mask. Members who are not wearing a face mask will not be recognized. Let me also make a few reminders for those members appearing in person. You will see members and witnesses appearing remotely on the monitor in front of you when you are speaking in what is known in WebEx as active speaker view. A timer is visible in the room directly in front of you. For members appearing remotely, I know you are all familiar with WebEx by now, but let me remind everyone of a few points. First, you will be able to see each person speaking during the hearing, whether they are in person or remote, as long as you have your WebEx set to active speaker view. If you have any questions about this, please contact appearing remotely who are not recognized should remain muted to minimize background noise and feedback. Fifth, I will recognize members verbally, but members retain the right to or you may unmute your mic to seek recognition. Obviously, we do not want people talking over each other, so my preference is that members use the chat function or email to facilitate formal verbal recognition. Committee staff will ensure that I am made aware of your request and I will recognize you. We will begin the hearing in just a moment when they tell me they are ready to begin the live stream.
Chair Maloney.
Yes.
Point of order, you mentioned the mask. You don't have one on.
Well, I'm talking. If you're talking, you can have your mask off.
Oh, I thought you said during questions you had to have it on.
Well, to come in the room, you have to have the mask on. But as you talk, as you and I know, it's very hard to talk with the mask on. So it can be removed when you're asking questions or when the committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. Without objection, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, as well as the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, will be permitted to join the committee and be recognized for questioning the witnesses. In addition, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, will be recognized at the proper time to introduce his constituent. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning. I would like to welcome Postmaster General Louis DeJoy and the Chairman of the Postal Board of Governors, Robert Duncan, to this oversight hearing, and I thank you all for being here. In all of our districts, we are hearing from constituents about significant delays in the delivery of mail, medicines, food, and other supplies. These delays are especially concerning and potentially life-threatening during the coronavirus crisis. These are not isolated complaints. They are widespread. Our offices have been receiving thousands of calls and emails about the detrimental effects these delays are having on our veterans, seniors, small businesses, and families across the country. When we asked postal leaders about these delays, they downplayed them. They dismissed them as temporary. They discounted them as minor, unintended consequences of reforms being put in place. But then we saw national headlines describing these delays in much more detail. I have a document here that lists headlines from almost every state in the country talking about these delays. For example, in my home state of New York, I quote, "Mail is delayed 5 to 6 days in New York City," Postal Workers Union says, end quote. In Kentucky, Ranking Member Comer's home state, quote, "Postal Service's cost cutting is frustrating Kentuckians and raising election concerns," end quote. In California, the home state of our Vice Chairman, Mr. Gomez, quote, "Like Armageddon, rotting food, dead animals, and chaos at postal facilities amid cutbacks," end quote. This list goes on and on. Last Friday, when Mr. DeJoy was confronted in the Senate with these widespread reports, he said he felt bad about what he called a dip in service. But then, after Mr. DeJoy's testimony in the Senate, we obtained an internal Postal Service document entitled PMG Briefing. This is a presentation prepared directly for the Postmaster General. It is dated almost 2 weeks ago, August 12th. According to this document, these delays are not just a dip. This document warns the Postmaster General of significant and widespread drops across the board in first-class marketing, periodicals, and other categories. This document shows that these delays are not a myth or conspiracy theory, as some of my colleagues have argued. These steep declines did not start in April or May when the corona crisis hit us, but in July, when Mr. DeJoy came on board and began making his changes. Our entire country is experiencing these delays as a result of Mr. DeJoy's actions, such as his decision to restrict the number of trips from processing plants to delivery units. Perhaps Mr. DeJoy thought his sweeping changes would not cause any delays. In my opinion, that would be incompetence at best. Or perhaps this was intentional. Maybe Mr. DeJoy was warned that his changes would cause delays, but he disregarded those warnings. That would be extremely reckless in the middle of a global pandemic with less than 3 months before an important election. Or perhaps there is a far simpler explanation. Perhaps Mr. DeJoy is just doing exactly what President Trump said he wanted on national television, using the blocking of funds to justify sweeping changes to hobble mail-in voting. All of these options are bad, but when you install someone as Postmaster General after he donates millions of dollars to your campaign, when he rushes to make changes without conducting adequate analysis, and when he withholds key information from Congress and doesn't level with us when people begin to ask, what in the world is going on? Given all of this, it's not surprising that the Postal Service Inspector General has already opened an investigation into Mr. DeJoy's controversial changes. We will be asking Mr. DeJoy some hard questions today. We will also be asking Mr. Duncan, as chairman of the board, about his own role in choosing Mr. DeJoy as Postmaster General, about his own role in vetting Mr. DeJoy for conflicts of interest, including Mr. DeJoy's ownership of stock in major Postal Service competitors, and Mr. Duncan's own role and allowing these delays to happen under his watch. Whatever the cause of these massive delays, the American people want to go back to the way about his own role in choosing Mr. DeJoy as Postmaster General, about his own role in vetting Mr. DeJoy for conflicts of interest, including Mr. DeJoy's ownership of stock in major Postal Service competitors, and Mr. Duncan's own role in allowing these delays to happen under his watch. Whatever the cause of these massive delays, the American people want to go back to the way things were. They don't want these changes. They want them reversed. They don't want anyone messing with the post office, and they certainly don't want it politicized. They want to have confidence that their mail, their medicine, their ballots will be delivered on time. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and I now recognize the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Comer, for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Maloney. I appreciate you calling this hearing today on the United States Postal Service, even though it would have been nice to do so before we actually voted on the bill Saturday. We all agree that the Postal Service needs to be reformed to better serve the American people. We all want the Postal Service to be as efficient and effective as possible to ensure Americans receive their prescriptions on time, small businesses thrive, and mail-in ballots are delivered in a timely fashion. But meaningful reform is going to take bipartisanship, something we have seen very little of in the last few days. Democrats fabricated a baseless conspiracy theory about the Postal Service and hastily passed a bill Saturday before hearing from you, Mr. DeJoy. The bill had no prior committee action to vet the bill, no hearings, no markup. Because of this rushed process, the bill was significantly amended by the Democrats before it went to the Rules Committee. It then proceeded to the House floor under a process that prevented any amendments to the bill. There was no Republican input, not at any step in the process. Just this morning, we have learned that the U.S. Postal Service opposes the bill that you all passed Saturday. They read the bill and realized that it ties their hands and will make it harder and more expensive to deliver the mail. At least this legislation is consistent with the Obama-Biden years at the Postal Service. More delays, more financial losses. This chain of events show Democrats are not serious about meaningful reform. The President does not support the bill, the Postal Service does not support the bill, and the Senate will likely not take up the bill. This is a political stunt. During Saturday's debate, Chairwoman Maloney unveiled a 60-page PowerPoint deck she had just received overnight from an apparent whistleblower. Madam Chair, I don't need to remind you that your and Adam Schiff's record with whistleblowers is less than stellar. The deck is dated August 12th, proving it played no role in the creation of your bill, which was unveiled the day before. The deck contains delivery performance data updated since the U.S. Postal Service's third quarter report. It shows some delays in July and August. I'm very interested to hear from Mr. DeJoy today about what he has learned about the causes of these delays. How much of an effect is the ongoing pandemic and increasing employee sick leave having on U.S. Postal Service's delivery performance? How does that compare to any temporary growing pains from efforts to make the Postal Service more efficient and self-sufficient? I say I am interested to hear Mr. DeJoy's responses because I do not know the answer to those questions. I don't believe the Chairwoman does either. This is why I've repeatedly said, Madam Chairwoman, that this committee is doing things backwards. When we make policy, it's our job to understand why something is happening. How would you find out why? You would have a hearing on the topic with the Postmaster General. When would you have this hearing? Certainly before you passed a bill. Returning to today, let me say that postal issues are something I've long heard about a great deal in my rural district. For example, I distinctly remember when the Obama-Biden administration, a mail facility in Paducah was closed, resulting in letters that once took a day to get from point A to point B, now taking 3 to 4 days. And I also heard a lot about the Postal Service from my grandmother, who spent her entire career, 27 years, as a rural mail carrier. My heart and sympathies go out to our Postal Service families who have lost loved ones during this pandemic. As her grandson and the congressman representing the 1st District of Kentucky, and as a ranking member of this committee, I want to see the Postal Service return to being a viable institution. But I'm disappointed at the hysterical frenzy whipped up around this issue by my colleagues on the left and their friends in the media. Let's look at the most often repeated claims again. Does the Postal Service need a bailout in order to survive through November? No. Mail volume has declined, but package delivery has shot through the roof, increasing USPS revenue by $1.5 billion. It has nearly $15 billion cash on hand and can operate until at least August of 2021. Next question, is the Postmaster General sabotaging the election by removing blue postal boxes in mail sorting machines? No. The Postal Service has more than adequate capacity to handle the vote by mail. If everybody in the U.S. requests and sends their ballots via mail, that's still less than one day's average volume. The blue boxes and mail sorters were both components of long-standing programs in response to significant reduction in mail volume, 33% reduction over the past 15 years. For reference, under President Obama, approximately 12,000 blue mailboxes were removed, and we didn't hear one word from the other side when he did that. The mail sorters were on track to be removed because they were sitting idle, simply taking up floor space for more productive activities. Is the Postal Service telling states they won't be able to deliver ballots on time? No. What the Postal Service is doing, and has for years, is trying to warn states their vote-by-mail laws don't take into account what the Postal Service can and cannot do. USPS can treat ballots as first-class mail or better than first-class mail, but they cannot break the laws of time and space. The letters that Democrats characterize as threats and propaganda are good faith efforts to prevent weeks of uncertainty and confusion, such as what happened very recently with Chairwoman Maloney's race. And the charges about overtime, those came from an effort to reduce billions of dollars in overtime and extra truck trips the Postal Service spends every year. If overtime and extra truck trips are normal, or a normal everyday part of your business operations, it means something's wrong and you better fix it. On Friday, before the Senate Homeland Security Committee hearing, Mr. DeJoy acknowledged the recent dip in service. He took responsibility for this performance lapse. The logical step is to understand why this happened and come up with a plan. Even though your bill would prevent that, Madam Chairwoman, I hope that today helps in that process. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his statement, and I ask unanimous consent to place in the record the Service Performance Measurement Postmaster General Briefing, an official report from the Post Office, data, research, facts. And in this report, the facts speak for themselves, and they show that under the first 2 months of the Postmaster General's work, the service fell anywhere from 6 to 10% in all the major categories. My bill merely funds the post office and returns it back to the way it was so that the services can get the mail out to the people during a pandemic and before a very important election. After the pandemic, we can revisit and have other statements and work go forward, but let's not dismantle the services to the American people, the veterans, the seniors. People deserve to get their mail in a timely way, and most districts are having people calling frantically, where is my mail, where's my medications? So facts speak for themselves. I'm placing this into the record. I now recognize the distinguished chairman of the Subcommittee on Government Operations, who has done a great deal of work in this area, Mr. Conley, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for your leadership. I was proud to co-sponsor your bill that passed the House with 26 Republicans, showing the courage to address an emergency with respect to the most esteemed institution of government in America. We have an obligation constitutionally to ensure that something that's been part of the American fabric since 1775 has a future. The Postal Service is not only fighting for its economic survival, it's fighting to maintain 120 years of professional service, rid of rotten patronage systems that served elected officials and not those who rely on mail every day. We're here today to save the Postal Service. We have in front of us a newly appointed Postmaster General and the Chairman of the Board of Governors that selected him for that post. We have a PMG who, 6 weeks into the complex and awe-inspiring new job, in the midst of a global pandemic, and just weeks before a consequential national election, where the Postal Service will play an unprecedented role, decides to announce a sweeping reorganization that he admits could slow down mail and will undoubtedly infuse uncertainty and confusion throughout the Postal Service and into our neighborhoods all across America. He announces these and other abysmally unsupported changes without engaging staff, unions, trade organizations, mailers, mail recipients, or Congress. In fact, Congress was told Mr. DeJoy did not yet feel prepared to respond to any questions we might have for him. Yet, he felt confident enough to freeze overtime, delay mail delivery, and announce sweeping reorganizations. And Mr. Duncan, congratulations on being the rubber stamp. The Postal Service Board of Governors is required by law to represent the public interest, not the president, not a political party, or not even the Postmaster General. Today, the Postal Service employs 650,000 people. It's the foundation for more than a $1.7 trillion mailing industry that employs another 7.5 million people. But at the turn of the last century, the U.S. Post Office was nothing more than 77,000 patronage positions rife with gross incompetence and often embezzlement of funds. It was rural America that used its political voice at that time to professionalize the post office. Instead of traveling miles to the closest general store to pick up mail from a sycophantic political hack, rural residents lobbied Congress en masse for rural free delivery, an innovation that brought mail delivery to even the most distant of homes and businesses. The massive grassroots lobby effort brought those with acumen and expertise into the post office and refocused political leaders on what they were elected to do: serve the people, not their political parties. As a nation, the people transformed the Postal Service, the post office, into the Postal Service. This history lesson resonates today. Yet another reckoning for this country and the Postal Service. Here again, the people of the nation have stood up loudly and consistently to condemn attempts to turn a crown jewel of our federal government, by far the most trusted agency among the hundreds that serve this nation, into a spoils systems honeypot. We cannot and must not let that happen. During this pandemic, the Postal Service is a lifeline to the delivery of life-saving prescription medications, medical equipment, food and pantry staples, stimulus checks to pay rent and utility bills, census forms, and even simply coupons to help struggling families stay out of poverty. What leader would think that even the possibility of slowing down mail in a time such as this is a good idea? What leader would take steps to freeze overtime for a workforce literally risking its life every day to deliver mail to the people of this nation? 40,000 postal workers have contracted COVID-19 or been quarantined because of it. 40,000. As the new PMG, Mr. DeJoy has recklessly cut hours and delayed delivery times in the pursuit of unsupported operational efficiencies. He's never once asked Congress for help, despite a team of members ready to provide financial and other support. The Chairwoman and I, along with a collection of hundreds of members, have been fighting to provide the Postal Service with $75 billion in support, to pay overtime and hazard costs to the dedicated workforce, to invest in a modernized and green postal fleet that doesn't explode, to pay for information technology investments that can streamline communications from trucks and planes that are running late with important cross-county or international mail deliveries. Mr. DeJoy and Mr. Duncan have failed to work with Congress to get this enacted. Thus far, the passenger service airline industry has received $25 billion in revenue stabilization. The Postal Service, not a dime. On August 18th, the PMG announced he would put a hold on some of these sweeping operational changes. But his announcement did not commit to reversing the cuts to service and capacity already made. It did not include an agenda to support election mail that demonstrates a commitment to helping the Postal Service fulfill its historic role in the upcoming election. And lastly, the PMG is still not advocating for the additional funding for the Postal Service, despite the fact that the Republican-controlled, Trump-appointed Board of Governors unanimously called for that package. Not a Democratic idea, a Republican-dominated board unanimously recommending it. The recent operational and organizational changes Mr. DeJoy has made have resulted in delivery delays across the country, as the chairwoman just showed. And those aren't our data, that's yours, Mr. Postmaster General. These delays have real impacts on real lives with real consequences. Most devastatingly, they've damaged the Postal Service's credibility. In a very brief time, congratulations, Mr. DeJoy, an esteemed institution that now is in doubt in the American public's mind. I applaud my colleagues in the House for passing the Delivery for America Act bill because we need to act now. We need to reverse this. We need to reassure the American public that they will get their mail on time and that their ballots will get there on time and be counted. This is about the future of our democratic institutions. This is the future about the most important election in my lifetime. That's what's at stake today. I yield back.
Madam Chair,
Yes?
I'd just like to make a point that you didn't notify our committee that Mr. Conley, as ranking or as chairman of the subcommittee, would be delivering opening remarks. That's another example of this rushed process, but I would like to ask that our ranking member of Mr. Conley's subcommittee also be allowed to deliver opening remarks.
Absolutely. The staff told me they reached out to you and your staff. It's general that the subcommittee that has the jurisdiction should speak on both sides. I have in my notes that Mr. Heiss will be, who is now the ranking member on the Subcommittee of Government Operations, will also be giving an opening statement. And I was told that they did reach out. In the future, I will personally call you myself.
Thank you.
And make sure it gets to you. I was told by staff, they talked to your staff, that they had reached out to you. If that did not get to you, then I apologize. I will personally call you every time, but it is usually the standard that we make an opening statement and the subcommittee with the jurisdiction makes an opening statement.
I agree, and I appreciate the chairwoman doing that. That's, again, important why we need to be prepared and not rush things like we have this postal reform bill.
Madam Chairwoman,
Yes, Mr. Conley.
if I can come to your defense, it has been your practice as chairwoman that when it is the jurisdiction of a subcommittee, you have always allowed the subcommittee chair and the ranking member to have opening statements. That's practice. It's not something you sprung on us today. And I can think of at least 4 examples. Mr. Raskin's one, Mr. Rauda's another, and their ranking members. So it's actually the practice of the committee under Chairwoman Maloney to do just that.
And Madam Chair, if I may, I agree that it's practice. We just weren't notified, and it wasn't on the agenda item that we received. But we appreciate that, and Mr. Heiss, it's my understanding, is prepared to deliver an impromptu opening statement.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Conley for pointing that out, and also pointing out the double standard that businesses such as the airlines and others are receiving federal aid in the HEROES package, in the COVID relief package, but the vital services from our post office that so many people depend on, a lifeline to Americans across America, they deserve to be funded too. I now recognize this distinguished subcommittee chairman, Mr. Heiss, for Government Operations, for an opening statement, and you are recognized, Mr. Heiss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. And yes, we were not notified of this, but I'm happy to take a few moments. Again, here we are having a hearing after a vote. I think this is absolutely disgusting. Certainly, we have had many votes without bothering to have a hearing, but I don't ever recall having a vote to so-called fix something and then have the hearing afterwards. This is unprecedented, and again, to me, I believe is an example of political malpractice on the side of the Democrats. We are here to talk about the Postal Service. And Madam Chair, I'm glad you brought up the HEROES Act because in itself, in the HEROES Act, I believe is the unveiling of what the Democrats are really trying to do, and that is themselves to fraudulently influence the upcoming election. In the HEROES Act is a requirement for universal mail-in ballots. In the HEROES Act is a requirement that states cannot be involved in requiring voter ID. And so we're going to have tens of millions of ballots sent out all across the country to many people who perhaps are deceased, to people who have moved, to people who knows who they are. And states are not going to be able to have any voter ID if the Democrats have their way. And then we're going to have the ballot harvesting take place. This is what's at stake. And I agree with Chairman Conley saying that this is the most important election. This is what is at stake. And if the Democrats have their way in this election, it will be filled with fraud. It will be filled with confusion. It will be filled with lawsuits because that's what is in the HEROES Act to produce if the Democrats have their way. And thankfully, that bill is not going anywhere any further than the bill that was passed Saturday before the hearing. Then we can talk about delays at the USPS. Well, we haven't even had hearings on the USPS since I believe it was April of 2019. And now all of a sudden we are called in for an emergency over this whole thing. We had a briefing in April of this year, not a hearing, it was a briefing. And the purpose of that briefing was to discuss the delays at the Postal Service due to COVID-19. And yes, there have been delays, and yes, there are thousands of USPS workers who are not showing up for work due to COVID-19. Are we surprised that there are any delays? Of course not. We had a briefing to discuss that just a couple of months ago. The Postmaster General has nothing to do with COVID-19, has nothing to do with it coming, nor does he have anything to do with thousands of his workers not showing up. We also have cities that are rioting. Of course, there are delays in many of those cities, be it Minneapolis or Portland or Chicago or LA or wherever it may be. The fact of the matter is the bailout that passed on Saturday in the House of Representatives is pointless. It refuses the opportunity to have any reforms. And so we have a Postal Service right now that has $14 billion cash on hand, another $10 billion available to them with the Treasury. And they can't even get access to the $10 billion because they have too much money cash on hand. And yet we pass a bill for another $25 billion, and in that bill we disallow them from making any changes. It doesn't matter how much money we keep throwing at the Postal Service if we don't allow for reform to take place, which is what is desperately needed. So with that, I do look forward to this hearing going forward. I fully anticipate a lot of political theater from my friends on the opposite side of the aisle. I do anticipate the continued attempt to portray a conspiracy that does not exist, when in fact it is their own party that I believe are fully committed, based upon the HEROES Act and other comments, to influence this upcoming election using fraudulent methods. And with that, Madam Chair, I will yield back, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak.
I now recognize Mark Walker to introduce our first witness, who is a constituent of Congressman Walker's.
Thank you, Madam Chair Maloney and Ranking Member Comer. It is my privilege to introduce Mr. Louis DeJoy, the Postmaster General of the United States. Mr. DeJoy has earned the respect of both charitable and business communities. Since its creation in 2005, the DeJoy Voss Family Foundation has positively impacted thousands of people. Duke University, the Cone Health Center for Children, police foundations, just to name a few. I was actually present when Mr. DeJoy was inducted into the Hall of Fame for the Triad's Junior Achievement Business Leaders, the world's largest organization educating K-12 students on financial literacy and entrepreneurship. Just this past week, I received in the mail the family contribution, the sponsorship of Family Services of the Piedmont, which serves 18,000 children and adults, many of those battling domestic violence issues. Yet maybe the most impressive act by this family is the one established for students from Title I schools, the Scholars Program at Elon University. You see, I've had the opportunity to meet some of these students who come from some of our most impoverished areas. It's not something Lewis flaunts, it's just something he does. Throughout his professional career, Louis DeJoy has garnered a reputation as a genius in the logistical innovation and supply chain field. As the CEO of New Breed Logistics, he took a broken trucking company from New York to North Carolina and transformed it into a prominent U.S. provider in contract logistics, creating close to 9,000 jobs. Maybe that's why he was unanimously appointed to the position by the USPS Bipartisan Board of Governors. Mr. DeJoy has been on the job about 2 months, but he's being blamed for implementing reforms Congress has passed. For example, back in 2006, it wasn't Mr. DeJoy who passed the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act. It was actually Congress. The leading sponsor on this bill, well, he's the one with the biggest picture in the room, former chair of this committee, Henry Waxman. Today, Mr. DeJoy will be viciously attacked with prepackaged questions and false accusations. One member even suggesting impeachment. That's original. How sad is it when the cancel culture has reached the halls of Congress? The man sitting before this committee today is not who the Democrats have villainized him to be. He's here today because he supported President Trump. And with this Congress, that makes you a target. Over the past month, the DeJoys have endured protests outside his home with hundreds of people blocking streets and frightening their neighbors. Sadly, in this day and age, an industry leader with a passion for service can be persecuted in the court of public opinion for his apparent political affiliation. As the circus unfolds today, remember that Louis DeJoy is a community-minded philanthropist, an industry-leading businessman, and most importantly, a man with a good heart doing his best to serve his country. Mr. DeJoy, I want to commend you for being here today. Many of your accusers didn't extend the same courtesy, but unlike the senator from Delaware, let's hope they at least know how to mute themselves. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. Our second witness is Robert Duncan, who is the chairman of the Postal Service's Board of Governors. He was appointed to the Board of Governors by President Donald Trump in August of 2018, and his term expires in December of 2025. Please stand and raise your right hands. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Let the record show that the witnesses affirmed this in the affirmative. Without objection, your written statements will be part of the record. With that, Mr. DeJoy, you are now recognized for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairwoman Maloney, Ranking Member Comer, and members of the committee. I am proud to be with you today on behalf of the 630,000 dedicated women and men of the United States Postal Service. On June 15th, I became America's 75th Postmaster General. Since that time, for a variety of reasons, there has been a great deal of attention to the Postal Service by our elected officials, the media, and the American people. I want to begin by assuring this committee and the American public that the Postal Service is fully capable and committed to delivering the nation's ballots securely and on time. This sacred duty is my #1 priority between now and Election Day. To be clear, we will do everything we can to handle and deliver election mail in a manner consistent with the proven processes and procedures that we have relied upon for years. Nevertheless, I encourage all Americans who choose to vote by mail to request their ballots early and to vote early as a common sense best practice. As part of this conversation, there are many inaccuracies about my actions that I wish to again correct. First, I did not direct the removal of blue collection boxes or the removal of mail processing equipment. Second, I did not direct the cutback on hours at any of our post offices. And finally, I did not direct the elimination or any cutback in overtime. I did, however, suspend these practices to remove any misperceptions about our commitment to delivering the nation's election mail. Any further assertions by the media or elected officials is furthering a false narrative to the American people. Now, let me describe the two actions I have taken in 70 days since my appointment. I came to the Postal Service with decades of experience in solving large and complex logistical problems. I plan to use this experience to help lead the operating change required for the Postal Service to grow and embark on a path of sustainability. On the day of my swearing in, the Postal Service Inspector General issued an astonishing report about the scheduled delays in Postal Service transportation and the substantial cost associated with our weaknesses in this fundamental operating principle. Upon review, I directed the Postal Service operations team to develop and execute on a plan to improve our adherence to the transportation schedule of our over 40,000 trips a day. We have accomplished this goal, as our on-time departures are approaching 98% and wasteful extra trips are down by over 70%. While we have had temporary service decline, which should not have happened, we are fixing this. In fact, last week, service improved across all major mail and package categories, and I am laser-focused on improving service for the American public. The second of two changes I made as Postmaster General is installing a new organizational reporting structure to better align talent and resources, to instill greater accountability for performance, and to focus the organization on service and growth. These two changes, creating our new on-time transportation network and designing an engaged, functional organizational structure, will be the catalyst for significant improvements in cost, performance, and growth that I plan for this vital American institution. Madam Chairwoman, the women and men of the Postal Service have demonstrated extraordinary commitment to our mission of service throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. In every community in America, we continue to work to keep our employees and customers safe as we fulfill our essential role in delivering the medications, benefit checks, and financial statements the public depends upon. Since the beginning of the pandemic, there has been a public outpouring of support for our postal employees as they perform their essential service throughout the nation. This is a well-deserved testament to their dedication. Chairwoman Maloney, Ranking Member Comer, I hope we can agree that the financial state of the Postal Service is unacceptable and needs to be fixed. I look forward to working with you and this committee and our stakeholders to restore the financial health of the United States Postal Service and to improve the way we serve the American public. This concludes my remarks, and I welcome any questions that you and the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and we will now recognize Chairman Duncan. You are now recognized for your testimony, and he will be appearing remote. Chairman Duncan, you are now recognized.
Thank you. Chairwoman Maloney, Ranking Member Comer, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Mike Duncan, and for the past 2 years, I've had the honor of serving as the chairman of the United States Postal Board of Governors. Throughout my life, I've looked for ways to help and strengthen and support institutions that are important to American communities. That's why I spent 5 years on the Tennessee Valley Authority Board, why I serve on Alice Lloyd College, why I've served on numerous boards and commissions in Kentucky and at a federal level. When I accepted this position, I did so because of my admiration for the United States Postal Service and its public service mission. I spent my life in rural Appalachia, and I know how important the Postal Service is to communities like mine. I also know the Postal Service provides important jobs to more than 630,000 Americans, which at one time included my own grandfather, who delivered mail by horseback in East Tennessee. Since I joined the board, I've made it a point to get on the road, to visit postal facilities, to meet workers, speak directly with our customers, union members, union leaders. These conversations have only deepened my understanding for and of the importance of the Postal Service. Serving on the Board of Governors of this institution is a significant responsibility. The governors, by statute, represent the public interest. That means I'll always remember its special role in our nation. And it means I can never forget the challenges that are putting us at risk. These challenges should come as no surprise to the members of this body. On 2 occasions, I've sent you the Postal Service's annual report to Congress. In each of those communications, I wrote that, quote, the Postal Service's business model is broken and will only produce widening losses in the coming years, absent dramatic change. Last fall, Postmaster General Megan Brannon notified the board of her impending retirement. And in response, the board immediately recognized that we would be faced with the most important decision we would make as governors, the selection of a new Postmaster General. The board agreed that the Postal Service would benefit from a transformational leader, one who could help us build upon the inherent strengths and confront its long-standing challenges. The Postal Service is an amazing institution, and we can do a lot to make it better. But we're unable to fix our broken business model or control our own pricing without the help of Congress and the Postal Regulatory Commission. What we can do is increase our efficiency and cut down on unnecessary expenses. We can also focus on marketability and modernization while reducing some expenses. Business as usual is not an option. It's for these reasons that after an organized, deliberate, and thorough search process, the board selected Louis DeJoy to serve as our 75th Postmaster General of the United States. He's the 5th Postmaster General since 1971 to join the institution from the private sector, and we believe the private sector experience that he has will be an asset, identifying ways to improve the Postal Service. In addition, Mr. DeJoy has decades of experience in improving and managing sophisticated logistic chains, the Fortune 100 companies, and as a major contractor to the U.S. Postal Service for more than 25 years. He has a deep knowledge about the institution and how it can be strengthened. Like the Postmaster General, the board has confidence in the Postal Service's ability to perform for the American people in this election season. 5 years from now, the United States will celebrate the 250th anniversary of the American Postal Service. Throughout our nation's history, this institution has delivered for the American people. Now, we have a sacred responsibility to preserve, defend, and strengthen this organization for generations to come. Thank you for your time. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize myself for questioning. Mr. DeJoy, we have all been flooded with concerns and complaints from our constituents about the delay in the mail. And in the vote on my bill, Delivering for America, on Saturday, 26 Republicans voted with us, and they expressed the same concerns. People depend on their mail for their medications, for business, for keeping in touch with their families. It's critically important. And we've seen headlines across this nation from many, many states, headlines, major news from our states about the delay in the mail. It's been said it's a major institution in our country. People depend on it. And over the weekend, we obtained this internal document, and it is dated less than 2 weeks ago on August 12th. And it's entitled Service Performance Measurement for the PMG, Postmaster General Briefing. Now, your office already confirmed to my office that this document is authentic. So let's go through a little bit of it now. This document clearly shows major degradations across the board, beginning in July when you started your changes. Here is the document for first-class mail, and overall, it is down an astonishing 8.1% from the baseline before your changes for the past 2 months. beginning in July. Now, the second one, the next slide, is the marketing mail, and that is down a stunning 8.42%. Now, the next, and it's on the wall where you can see it better, the next periodicals, and that is down almost 10%, down 9.57%. So, Mr. DeJoy, you and your aides have repeatedly downplayed these delays. You just downplayed it in your testimony. But this is just a disaster for the people who need their mail. Don't you agree? Would you turn on your mic? We can't hear you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
We are very concerned with the deterioration in service and are working very diligently. In fact, we're seeing a big recovery this week, and in fact, that report, oddly, I requested that report be put together. Oddly enough, we didn't have measurement briefings at an executive level like this before my arrival, where the whole executive team was involved in looking at what the underlying circumstances were, and we're focused on fixing it. We're starting to see a nice recovery, and we will have it back to, my goal is to get it, to a higher level. We were not meeting metrics before. With this change, this fundamental change, we have a real good shot at getting to the stated metrics that we are supposedly governed by.
Well, you just testified that you've been on the job 70 days. Mm-hmm. So this is essentially your report card for that period of time. If any other CEO had this kind of plummeting record in his first 2 months on the job, I can't imagine why he would be kept on.
That's an unfair accusation.
May I continue? When you testified on Friday, mm-hmm. Senators asked you over and over about the status of these delays. They also asked you to produce analysis about the negative impacts of your changes. It would have been easy to mention to the senators that this document existed. You could have said, as a matter of fact, Senator, I just received a detailed briefing, and unfortunately, the data shows major delays in nearly all categories. But you didn't do that. You dismissed these nationwide delays as, quote, a dip, and you refused to turn over any analysis. So my question is, why didn't you disclose this document and any analysis to the Senate when you had it and they were asking for it?
They asked me for it on Friday. They asked me for an analysis on my decision. Of the delays. I watched the testimony. They wanted an analysis. Why are all these delays? Well, there's a lot of reasons for delays besides just the action that I took to run your trucks on time. There are other reasons for the delays in the nation.
Well, I would say running trucks on time would probably increase delivery, but for some reason it backed it up. 5 to 6
Oddly
days
enough,
into
yes.
the district that I represent, so reported. But Mr. DeJoy, on August 14th, this committee sent you a 10-page letter, along with the chairs of ranking members of 3 other committees. And we asked you to produce all communications, and I'm quoting from the letter, all communications, evaluations, assessments, or reports regarding mail left behind or delayed as a result of these new policies that you instituted, end quote. We asked for these documents by Friday, and on Friday night, you did produce some documents to us, but you did not produce this one. And so my question is, why did you leave this important internal document from the postal professionals that was delivered to you and briefed to you 2 days before the Senate hearing? Why did you leave it out?
I'm not familiar with the request in total or how we supported it. I'm sure the staff answered the questions as they were asked. And let me just, for the record, clear up. That is not a policy change. That is a request that we run our 40,000 trucks a day on schedule. And your intuition is right? You would think that the mail moved faster, and it did. A good portion of it moved faster. All right, and we've also, I was sitting there looking at a report that talked somewhere between $1 billion and $3 billion worth of cost wasted on our truck trips being out of schedule. It was an easy request that I spoke with every senior executive in the organization about the change.
Time is limited, and I'm concerned why we didn't receive any of this information. And I have to just say that, Mr. DeJoy, we sent our letter 2 days after you received this briefing and this document. It must have been fresh on your mind. There's absolutely no excuse for concealing it and withholding this information from the committee or from your testimony before the Senate when you were expressly asked questions about the information in the document. And unfortunately, this committee received it from someone else. So, Mr. DeJoy, you're withholding information from us, concealing documents, and downplaying the damage that you're causing. So let me close with this. This committee expects a full and complete production of all the documents we requested no later than this coming Wednesday. And if you continue to withhold information or otherwise fail to comply, you can expect a subpoena. Now, I know many of our members plan to ask about how you intend to fix the problems you created, and reverse these horrible trend lines. So we will get to those questions next. With that, I now recognize the distinguished ranking member for 5 minutes for his questions. Virginia, he is saying that Virginia Fox will be the first to respond. Virginia Fox from the great state of North Carolina.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, I do note that you're going over time a great deal, but Postmaster General DeJoy, thank you very much for being with us today. Some claim the expedited discrete afternoon sortation pilot and your changes are deliberative efforts to slow down mail and hurt Postal Service employees. Is that true?
No, ma'am.
Are you banning employees from charging overtime, or are you trying to limit unplanned overtime to ensure the Postal Service's viability?
At this time, no, ma'am, and no time since I've been here.
Thank you. Postmaster General DeJoy, as a logistics expert, and I believe that Representative Walker outlined your expertise very well, what does the consistent use of unplanned overtime and the need for extra trips mean in terms of the efficiency of operations?
Well, besides costing substantial amounts of money, for the Postal Service in terms of billions of dollars, it is also does not keep the delivery system in balance, which also results in delays in mail and in equilibrium in production processes across the whole network.
Can more efficient on-time operations result in better delivery performance?
Absolutely.
And does unplanned overtime hinder the Postal Service's ability to stay financially viable?
Absolutely.
You know, my husband and I have experienced some very, very inefficient services on the part of the post office in the last few weeks. I'm not going to go into those details, but I want to applaud your approach to accountability. And what we know from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle is they run away from accountability in every case in the federal government or in allied services like the post office. So let me applaud you for pushing on accountability. Mr. DeJoy, as we're all aware, the Postal Service is not a government agency that receives appropriations. In fact, it is law. The Postal Reorganization Act of 1970 created the U.S. Postal Service as an independent and self-sustaining entity. Postmaster General DeJoy, do you believe that it is your duty to uphold this law and ensure that the USPS is self-sufficient?
I do.
And what will it take to make the USPS self-sufficient?
Legislation with regard to our healthcare Medicaid integration and our pension reform, flexibility from the PRC. At least we'll get a decision from them. We're in the 14th year of a 10-year analysis. The Postal Service itself, there's a library of OIG reports identifying flawed practices and billions and billions and billions of dollars of cost, waste that this committee, nobody seems to pay attention to. And then the Postal Service, our management team itself, delivering, helping fix ourselves, both in terms of service and cost. And we have a plan now to do that. And part of it includes running our trucks on time.
And these OIG reports have come from Democrat presidents and Republican administrations both. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. If you have no operational flexibility, can you possibly make the Postal Service self-sufficient?
I think we have a very, very good shot. We have some new revenue ideas for the Postal Service also. We have it, we're beginning to finalize the plan. I need to brief the board, but I'm very, very excited about the management team under our new organizational structure. I'm excited about the dedication of the 650,000 men and women, and I think we can embark upon, with a little help from this Congress, we're about to embark upon some significant, exciting future for the Postal Service. I believe in a 6-day delivery. I think the carrier is, with the carriers, our postal carriers' relationship with the American people is what is the most important ingredient in giving us the approval rating that we have. And we have plans to really enhance that relationship and to help our growth.
Well, again, I want to thank you for bringing your expertise to become the Postmaster General of the United States. You have the exact background that we need and the commitment that we need to make the post office work the way Americans want it to work. Thank you, Madam Chairman and Ranking Member. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Congresswoman Norton. Congresswoman Norton by WebEx.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. This hearing is very necessary to clarify matters that were left open when we took the vote already on this bill. Mr. DeJoy, in your testimony, you suggested that the coronavirus was having, and here I'm quoting, was a significant issue in employee availability in many, many parts of the country. If that's the case, sir, I want to know why you'd be reducing overtime. Isn't overtime even more necessary to postal employees during this national emergency, during this pandemic with so many people at home, and given what you've already testified to about the significant issue in employee availability across the country?
Thank you.
Why wouldn't overtime be necessary to make up for all of that?
Thank you, ma'am. Since I've been here, we've spent $700 million in overtime. The overtime rate before my arrival was at 13% within the organization. It's still at 13%. As I said in my opening statement, this is a continued misinformation regarding what I did since I've gotten there. I never put a limitation on overtime.
Well, that's very important testimony, Mr. DeJoy, because in some states we're seeing 10 times the normal volume of mail. I'd like to ask about additional resources 2 weeks before the election. Is expanded allowance of overtime one of the items under consideration when you have already announced you will bring, quote, additional resources to bear in 2 weeks before the election? Does that include expanded overtime? Indeed, wouldn't it have to?
Yes, ma'am, it does. We will, the 650,000 men and women of the Postal Service are very committed to having a successful election in our role in the election. Overtime, extra truck trips, postal inspection checks, rounds in each postal processing facility.
That's very important. That's very important for the record, that expanded overtime will be allowed in the 2 weeks before the election. My next question is on a P&G Postal Service document we have received. This is what it said and why my questions were necessary. I'm quoting now the document entitled PMG Expectations and Plan. Overtime will be eliminated. There you see it before you. Again, we are paying too much for overtime, and it is not cost effective and soon will be taken off the table. More to come on this. We asked your general counsel, and he claimed that came from a mid-level manager and should not be treated as an official statement of postal office policy. So I ask you, would a postal manager send this document without some kind of word from you or from the top of the agency? Can you explain who this was and give us the name of that manager?
Thank you. I have purposely not tried to find out who that was, but there are many ways that people interpret.
You have tried not to find out who that was?
That's right. I don't know. That was not a directive from me. That there's 50,000 managers within the organization. This is one of the reasons I changed the organization quickly after the rollout of the truck schedule. There was very confusing.
Are you looking for whoever it was who jumped ahead of you in issuing that to all your to all your employees?
Absolutely.
I wish you would give that name when you find it to the chair as well. In a statement on August 18th, you stated overtime has and will continue to be approved as needed. I wanted to understand as needed what that means. Can postal managers and employees continue approving and using overtime as they did before your tenure began, or are there any changes since you took office?
Same as from prior to me being here.
Have you issued any internal guidance to that effect, and would you provide it to us, please?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
I asked, have you issued any internal guidance to that effect, that the employees can continue to approve and use overtime?
I never issued a guidance against that effect, but everybody, the
organization.
organization.
Are you intending to issue any guidance to the effect?
Yes, I've told the executive team, the operations team, they know there is no different process
Madam Chair.
than prior to my arrival.
Okay, the gentlewoman's time is completed.
Madam Chair, can I just ask that he provide you any written guidance on overtime?
Okay.
To the chair of the committee.
I make that request on behalf of the committee. I now recognize Mr. Gosar, Congressman Gosar.
Yeah, can you hear me and see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you.
We can hear you, but
DeJoy,
we don't
thank
see
you.
you. There you are.
Okay. Mr. DeJoy, thank you very much for coming today. And I want to clear up some obvious political disinformation that the majority is actually putting out. So, and then I also want to say thank you very much for acknowledgement of the dip in services, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. On Saturday on the House floor, my colleague said the post office is on the verge of collapse. But that's not true. You have over $10 billion cash on hand and access to a $10 billion line of credit, which makes you fiscally viable through August of 2021. Is that true, Mr. DeJoy?
Yes, but I would say that only in Washington, D.C. would that be a good position to be in when I have $135 billion in liabilities, a $2.5 billion a month, a week, biweekly payroll, and a whole bunch of others. But yes, we can get through the election, and with the loan, should we take it? I don't know how we would pay it back, but should we take it? We should be fine for through mid 21.
So now, isn't it true that you're actually generating more revenue at this time of the year than you also did last year, and you're processing more, successfully processed an uptick in mass mail government items such as the stimulus checks and the the census questionnaire ballots? Is that true?
We're seeing more revenue, mostly due to package increase. Mail products are down 15% or so on average, but package volume is up substantially. But package volume is very costly for us to handle in an overcapacity method.
So now, do you believe with the money on hand, successful, seeing that you said the mail volume is down by 15%, and the hard work of the over 600,000 postal workers, that you can handle the slight election increases that we'll possibly see?
I will be very, very clear that the 650,000 men and women, we are working with our union leadership, our management team, our employees. We will be able to handle all election mail for the 2020 election.
So now I want to go back to the slowdown related to the pandemic. I want to highlight that this week the president of the Phoenix Postal Workers Union stated that it was suffering from these pandemic workforce strains, that no processing machines have been removed during your tenure, and that the United States Postal Service processed over 700,000 ballots in our recent primary election. Let me ask you a question, Mr. DeJoy. Have you had slowdowns or impediments like in Seattle and Portland and New York City and Chicago because of the rioting and the anarchy that's going on?
Well, sir, I mean, any kind of rioting does produce delays with any type of public service, so I don't have a specific measurement on that. But I will say this, that as the coronavirus cases throughout the country have expanded, it has had an impact on our employee availability. And in the urban areas that are hot spots, the averages don't play out what the real picture is like in areas like Philadelphia, where employee availability is significantly below our normal run rates and what it has been in the pandemic. We actually started to peak in terms of employee availability issues in the July timeframe.
Now, I want to go back to you paused any policy changes to the Postal Service, such as the elimination of overtime, prohibiting extra trips, hiring freezes, and removing sorting machines. Is that true?
The extra trips, and they weren't prohibited. It's true on everything else but the extra trips. My direction was we need to work on getting our trucks on schedule and mitigating our extra trips. We still run 700-800 extra trips a day, and we still have thousands of truck trips that run late. So it wasn't a flat directive. It was work to our plan. That was my directive. And come up with a plan to work to our plan. So the management team put the plan together and executed on the plan. But everything else I had nothing to do with. There was a long-standing plan on collection boxes and sorting machines and postal hours. That was that was ongoing, really, in the areas that were taking care of that.
So another quick question. Is the Pony Express still available today?
I've been here 70 days, sir. I'm searching for the good. I haven't seen that yet, though, so I think it's gone.
I wonder, technology has its changes, and any transfer of new ideas, it always goes smoothly, doesn't it, Mr. DeJoy?
I'm sorry?
A transition where you're trying to make changes always goes smoothly, doesn't it?
The gentleman's time has expired, but you may answer his question.
Transitions don't always go smoothly. We should have a recovery process. Our recovery process is taking too long. This should have been resolved in a few days, and it's not. So the impact. There's a lot of reasons there are a lot of things that are impacting our service. This is one of them on the front end, and we should have cleared it up quicker. And I think we have the focus on it now, and it'll recover quite rapidly going forward.
Thank you. Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Clay. Congressman Clay.
Thank you for conducting this hearing. Thank you, Madam Chair, for conducting this hearing. Mr. DeJoy, one of the most damaging results of your actions is the reports we have heard over and over again from people and families across the country who are not getting their mail-in medications on time, and it's heartbreaking. The Postal Service delivers hundreds of millions of prescription drug shipments each year. That is millions of shipments per day, 6 days a week, of vital medicines delivered across the country.
We're having a technical problem right now with Mr. Clay. We can't hear you. It's breaking up. Should we go to someone else and come back? Okay, Mr. Clay, we're gonna try to correct what's. There's a problem. We can't hear you.
This is literally a lifeline.
We're gonna hold your testimony.
Populations.
Should we go for it or not? Okay.
This problem has gotten aggravated during the coronavirus crisis because mail order.
Madam Chair, for the sake of time, let's.
Okay. Mr. Clay, we're going to hold up on you and go to Mr. Lynch and then go to a Republican and come back to you. We have technical difficulties. Mr. Lynch, Congressman Lynch, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. DeJoy, for attending. Mr. DeJoy, you've been the Postmaster General of the United States for a couple of months right now?
70 days.
70 days, okay. So I've been a member of this committee for about 20 years, and since my mom and two of my sisters, a bunch of my aunts, cousins, my in-laws, all worked at the post office. Some of them are retired, some of them are still there. As a member of Congress, you might say I've been compelled to take a keen interest on matters affecting the Postal Service. I'm also a former president of the Ironworkers Union in Boston, so you can get a sense of my perspective. It's a blue-collar, common sense, get your work done sort of perspective. So Mr. DeJoy, as the Postmaster for the United States of America for the last 70 days, did you know that the Postal Service has never allowed itself to be in the situation that it's in today? Throughout the Postal Service history, there's been a tradition of reliable delivery from the very beginning, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 7 of the United States Constitution. Going back to Ben Franklin, our first Postmaster General, the Pony Express has been mentioned before. I was actually watching a Ken Burns special last week, and he had these heart-wrenching letters that were back and forth from soldiers during the Civil War. So even at a moment when the country was at war with itself, the mail was delivered. During the First World War and the Spanish flu influenza of 1918, through the Great Depression, millions of people out of work, 1,000 bank failures, the mail was delivered on time. Even during the Second World War, with the threat of Nazi U-boats, international mail was delivered on time. Just so happens I was elected on 9/11, the day of the terrorist attacks on our nation, a god-awful day. Some people forget, in the days after 9/11, we had direct anthrax attacks on the United States Postal Service. We lost 2 brave postal workers, Joseph Cursine and Tom Morris, down at the Brentwood facility here in D.C., from anthrax inhalation. But for the good of the country, the postal unions continue to send their members into the post office to do their job to keep the country running. So two weeks ago, after you'd been postmaster for just a few weeks, that all changed. In the middle of a pandemic that has killed 170,000 Americans, and on the eve of a national election, at a time when the CDC is advising people not to gather, limit outside contact, the Postal Service started removing 671 high-speed mail sorting machines across the country. You stopped the APWU from sorting the mail, and you stopped the national letter carriers and mail handlers from working overtime to deliver the mail. And for the first time in 240 years in our history of the United States Postal Service, you sent out a letter, embarrassingly, in July to 46 states that said the post office can't guarantee that we can deliver the mail in time for the elections in November. And we have reports from across the country, as you acknowledge, service has been delayed and the mail is piling up. You have ended a once proud tradition. Now, as a member of the Oversight Committee, we are the chief investigative committee in the Congress. We conduct oversight on every matter that impacts the American people, foreign and domestic. There are members on this committee who have been to Iraq and Afghanistan a couple dozen times. They've been to Yemen, Somalia, Gaza, you name it. They literally go to the ends of the earth to investigate matters that affect the American people, especially when it involves our sons and daughters in uniform. In this moment, it is our postal workers who happen to be our men and women in uniforms. They are on the front lines of this pandemic. Throughout this pandemic, they've risked their own health and safety to deliver, or tried to deliver, mail, medicines, and mail-in ballots to every American home and business 6 days a week. As a member of this August committee, I'm supposed to ask you a question. In my heart, I'm tempted to ask, after 240 years of patriotic service delivering the mail, how can one person screw this up in just a few weeks? Now, I understand you bring private sector expertise. I guess we couldn't find a government worker who could screw it up this fast. It would take them a while. The president is running this post office like a business, like he said. He's running it into the ground, as he has declared bankruptcy a few times on his own businesses. In an effort to apply the facts, the real facts, not the alternative facts, based on what you have actually done, one can only reach, as a fact finder, we can only reach 2 conclusions. One, either through gross incompetence, you have ended the 240-year history of delivering the mail reliably on time, or the second conclusion that we could gather is that you're doing this on purpose and that you're deliberately dismantling this once proud tradition.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman may answer his question.
My last question is this.
Thank you,
What
sir.
the heck are you doing? What the heck are you doing?
The gentleman's time has
That's my
expired.
question.
Thank you, sir.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman
First
may
of all,
answer.
I would like to agree with you on the heroic efforts of our 650,000 employees across the nation, and the history of the Postal Service for their the 250-year history of serving the American public. And I'm very
Will you put
proud-
the machines back?
I'm very proud to lead the organization. The rest of your accusations are actually
Will you put the
outrageous.
high-speed machines
No,
back?
I will not.
You will not.
Will not.
You will not. Well, there you go.
There I go. What?
There
Those
will-
machines,
Madam
those
Chair,
machines have been
let the
coming
witness
out.
answer the question, and he has gone over time.
Order. The gentleman may answer the question without being interrupted. And
Every
the question is, will
accusation-
you put the machines back?
The answer is no, and every accusation you made, other than the truck adhere to the truck schedule is inaccurate and more misinformation for the American public.
You won't put the machines back, though.
I will
You
not-
took them out. They're high-speed
Madam
machines.
Chair,
Did not take-
You took them
Madam
out.
Chair.
Mr. Jordan is now recognized. Congressman Jordan, is he here? Just Congressman Jordan.
No, I believe that's not the order.
What? No, it's Palmer, Congressman Palmer. I'm getting different signs up here.
All right.
Why don't we go back to the old way that you write it down, because it keeps changing. Okay. Congressman Palmer is now recognized.
I thank the chairman, and I just want to point out a Washington Post article from August 26, 2015, almost 5 years to the day, that there was a decline in first-class letter delivery of 18 to 44%, and a 38% decline in the performance over the same time in 2014. This was during the Obama-Biden administration. The United States Postal Office in 2012 started closing dozens of mail sorting facilities. From January to June of 2015, there were 494 million pieces of mail that did not arrive on time, a 48% increase in delayed mail delivery, and I'm sure that that was intended to impact the 2012 election, yet this committee didn't see fit to look into that. Mr. DeJoy, these will be yes and no for the most part. Is there any way the post offices can know whether or not ballots that they are delivering to households or to eligible voters? Is there any way for the post office to know that?
No, sir.
I bring that up because there's analysis of data released by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission in 2019. In a recent U.S. Census Bureau's 5-year American Community Survey, there were 378 counties nationwide that have more voter registrations than citizens living there who are old enough to vote. These are counties where the registration exceeds 100%. In Iowa, there are at least 18,658 extra voters. Under the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, Judicial Watch sent notice of violation letters to 19 large counties in 5 states, California, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Virginia, and Colorado. Real Clear Politics reported that Los Angeles County had an estimated 1.6 million ineligible voters, and 38 states have counties where the voter registration is over 100%, including Montgomery County, Maryland, which represented my distinguished friend, Mr. Raskin. The same article cited a 2012 Pew study that found there are 24 million voter registrations that are no longer valid or significantly inaccurate. Pew's total included 1.8 million dead people and another 2.75 million who were registered in at least 2 states. New York, for instance, in this most recent primary that impacted your race, Madam Chairman, had 84,000 ballots, almost a fifth of all the, over a fifth of all the ballots, I think, cast. 12,000 in your race that were disqualified. So my question to you, Mr. DeJoy, is there any way to be sure that more ballots than a household should be eligible to receive are not being delivered?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Is there any way for the Postal Service to determine whether or not a household is getting more ballots than they should be?
We're focused on delivering the mail.
So the answer is
sent to the
no.
address.
There's no way to know that. And so, if there was some way to know that, I'm sure the postal inspectors would get involved.
Okay. So let's try that again. Once it calls you, it tells you. Press
Madam
1 to
Chairman,
be connected.
I
think that's
reserve
what
my
we need
time.
to do.
What is
Okay, so it's not okay.
What's going on?
I think the Chinese have hacked in or something.
Okay. What is that noise?
Ma'am, the clock is still running.
Madam Chair, can his time be restored?
We will give you adequate time to
Okay.
complete because of.
Have we resolved this, do you think?
What is the problem? What is it?
They're just trying to deal with technical. We'll give you extra time. Keep going.
Okay.
You have extra time. We have some technical problems.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I do appreciate your indulgence. Thank you. The Census Bureau reports that 11% of Americans move each year. Section 8 of the National Voter Registration Act, which was passed by the Democrats in 1993, signed by President Clinton, and voted for by Mr. Cooper and Mr. Clay and Madam Chairman Maloney, requires states to perform voter registration maintenance. It is really the responsibility of the federal government to ensure that states and local governments make sure their voter rolls are accurate, that they have removed deceased people, people who have moved or inactive voters. And it should be noted that the Obama-Biden administration did not bring a single Section 8 enforcement action during their entire term. That makes the post office task of only delivering ballots to eligible voters more difficult. My point is that you've been accused of trying to impact an election when the fact of the matter is, and for those people who have never had a real job out in business, what you've been trying to do is improve the performance of the post office so that what happened in 2015 does not continue to happen. And it's going, and the accusations are that you're trying to throw the election. When the fact of the matter is, the fact that the federal government has not done its part, particularly during the Obama-Biden administration, to ensure that the voter rolls are accurate, has made your job more difficult. It's really not your job, is it? One way or the other.
No, sir.
Can we count on the post office and the delivery personnel around the nation to not deliver mass ballots? Stacks of ballots to an address where the delivery person knows that there's nobody there, an abandoned house, an abandoned apartment complex, a business? That would be reported, wouldn't it?
We deliver mail to the address specified.
And if dozens or hundreds of mail-in ballots are dumped into blue mailboxes instead of left on a regular mailbox for pickup or dropped off at the post office, would it make sense to report to the postal inspectors to make sure that those ballots are legitimate?
Well, there are processes that the postal inspectors deploy. I'm not fully aware of what they are right now, but there are processes that the postal inspectors deploy to identify any fraudulent type of activity within the mail system.
Well, we need to make sure that this election is not tainted by fraudulent mail-in ballots. And Madam Chairman, I'm going to do something that I rarely do. And when Mr. Gosar mentioned the burned out, the riots in Portland and other Seattle and other places around the country, there was a chuckle from one of the Democrats on this committee, and I take offense at that. This is a picture of the burned out post office in Minneapolis, okay? There was mail in that post office that was lost. There may have been prescription drugs that were lost. There may have been Social Security checks in that office that were lost. It is a fact that not only is the mail delivery delayed when you have anarchists laying siege to cities all over the country, it endangers postal workers, delivery people. It may have endangered people's lives who were not able to get their medicine because it burned up in the Minneapolis post office. That's not funny. And I hope that the Democrats in this committee and in this Congress will take seriously what's happening in American cities. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. We're still having difficulty connecting with Congressman Clay. I now recognize Mr. Cooper, Congressman Cooper.
Mr. DeJoy, here's what your so-called reforms have done to my district in 70 days. A lady named Elena Roser paid $5 on July 22nd to send a certified letter to the Nashville, Tennessee Social Security office. The distance is 20 miles. The letter took 12 days to arrive. Just this morning, excellent reporting from Nashville's Channel 5 TV proves that Nashville's mail trucks are being forced to leave on schedule even when completely empty. Imagine it, 53-foot trucks forced to travel hundreds of miles completely empty due to your so-called reforms. Here are the truck records. That's not efficiency, that's insanity. For anyone thinking of voting absentee, the effect of your policies is to unilaterally move up Election Day from November 3rd to something like October 27th. And if you force more empty trucks on the highway, you will be able to single-handedly move up Election Day even earlier. According to NPR, already 550,000 primary ballots, absentee ballots, were rejected in just 30 states. And one of the main reasons was late delivery. How dare you disenfranchise so many voters when you told the Senate committee just last week that you had a sacred duty to protect election mail? You know that it's a felony for a Postal Service officer or employee to delay delivery of mail. A postal employee can be fined or imprisoned for up to 5 years for delaying the mail, but somehow you can delay all the mail and get away with it. They can be prosecuted, but you can't, even if your actions are 1,000,000 times worse. Mr. DeJoy, do you have a duty to obey U.S. law like every other American?
I do, sir.
Well, previous Postmasters General have been punished for much smaller conflicts of interest than yours. In 1997, the 70th Postmaster General, Marvin Runyon from Tennessee, had to pay $27,000 because of a $350,000 conflict of interest. If your $30 million conflict of interest, 100 times larger than Mr. Runyon's, were treated like your predecessors, you would have to pay a $2.7 million fine and probably be ousted from being Postmaster General. So, Mr. DeJoy, are you above the law that applies to other Postmasters General?
I don't agree with the premise. I'm in full compliance with all ethical requirements that I need to have. And there's an OIG investigation, and I welcome the result of that report.
Well, Mr. DeJoy, as a mega donor for the Trump campaign, you were picked along with Michael Cohen and Elliot Broidy, 2 men who have already pled guilty to felonies, to be the 3 deputy finance chairmen of the Republican National Committee. Did you pay back several of your top executives for contributing to Trump's campaign by bonusing or rewarding them?
That's an outrageous claim, sir, and I resent it.
I'm just asking a question.
The answer is no.
So you did not bonus or reward any of your executives?
No.
Or anyone that you solicited for a contribution to the Trump campaign?
No, sir.
Not in whole or in part?
Actually, during the Trump campaign, I wasn't even working at my company anymore.
Well, we want to make sure that campaign contributions are legal. So all your campaign contributions are legal.
I'm fully aware of legal campaign contributions.
Well, what if
I resent the assertion, sir. What are you accusing me of?
Well, I'm asking a question. Do your mail delays fit Trump's campaign goal of hurting the post office, as stated in his tweets? Are your mail delays implicit campaign contributions?
These types of questions. I'm here to represent the Postal Service. It has nothing to do with, all my actions have to do with improvement into the Postal Service. Am I the only one in this room that understands that we have a $10 billion a year loss? Right? Am I the only one in this room that has looked at the OIG reports that have stacked up? Will you give this committee
your communications with Mark Meadows, with Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, with the President? Mr. DeJoy, is your backup plan to be pardoned like Roger Stone?
Oh, God. Pitiful.
You have 2 seconds to answer the question.
I have no comment on that. It's not worth
I see my time has expired.
Gentleman's
Not
time
worth
has
a comment.
expired. Representative, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe, is recognized for 5 minutes. Congressman Stubbe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, as a veteran who served in Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, to compare postal workers to our military service members in Iraq or Afghanistan, quite frankly, to me, is offensive. Last time I checked, Postal Service drivers weren't getting their vehicles blown up by IEDs or being shot at as they drove around and delivered mail. So to try to compare our military service members who sacrificed on the battlefields across this world to our Postal Service members is frankly offensive as a person that had served. It's unfortunate that there are Democrats on this committee that have 100% politicized the Postal Service to try to stoke fear with the American people. But we shouldn't be surprised. It's a familiar theme for Democrats over the last 2 years. A subcommittee chairman of this committee, when asked on national television, and I quote, "Are you saying, say it directly, is this an attempt by the president you believe to interfere in the election?" The answer was absolutely. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that President Trump is using the Postal Service to interfere with the election. None, in fact, quite the opposite. But Democrats don't care about the facts. So here we go again. Seems like just yesterday we were hearing how the Trump campaign colluded and conspired with Russia to interfere with the last election. And when the facts actually came out, there was no evidence that that ever occurred. This is absolutely a concocted narrative by the Democrats to stoke fear in the American people, just like the Russia collusion hoax. Financial issues have plagued the Postal Service for decades and is vastly in need of reform. Mr. DeJoy just stated that $10 billion loss a year. Businesses couldn't operate that way. But the Democrats don't want real reform. If they did, they would have worked with our witness today. They would have worked with Republicans in crafting a bill. They would have worked with our counterparts in the Senate. They would have worked with the administration to actually come up with reform that would actually pass. This is a political stunt to further the Democrats' newest interference hoax. I represent 9 counties in Florida, and just last week we held our primary elections. Florida saw the largest turnout in a presidential election year primary since 1992. That was 18 years. About 2.3 million mail-in ballots were cast, which made up about 59% of all ballots cast. Initial reports indicate that there were minimal issues with the additional ballots handled by the Postal Service. There were no issues in my 9 counties with absentee ballots in this district that I'm aware of. Mr. DeJoy, would it be fair to say that the Postal Service successfully delivered during the Florida's primary last week?
Yes, sir.
The 2.3 million mail-in ballots that were cast in Florida are a significant amount for one state. What are the factors that led to the Postal Service being able to deliver the substantial increase in mail-in ballots on time?
When it comes to ballots, the Postal Service, prior to my arrival and the heightened awareness of this particular election, throws everything it has to at moving ballots through the system. The ballots are usually identified with special markings, and every employee is very much, and manager is very much focused on making sure that ballots move quickly through the process, sometimes in advance of first-class mail. So those particular processes were deployed and will be deployed as we come into the 2020 election.
And Florida has, am I correct in stating that Florida has a reasonable time frame for Postal Service to return the ballots, as opposed to some states that just allow ballots to be requested at the last minute, therefore delaying their ability for the Postal Service to get those ballots to the precincts in time?
Thank you so and that is a big part of the effort of the Postal Service prior to my arrival and since my arrival, and the purpose of sending out the letters to all the states with regard to what we just want to make everybody aware of what is it that will really work. We can put all these additional processes on, but it would be more helpful if we had reasonable standards from the election boards that comply with our processes to enable us to do it more efficiently and effectively.
So to clarify, do you need any additional funding to be able to successfully deliver ballots in Florida this November?
No, we do not, sir.
Are there any lessons that other states can learn from the way that Florida handles our ballots in absentee voting?
Well, I'm not particularly familiar with Florida, but our general counsel and has put out letters with regard to each state's election guidelines. We have a website that's just been posted on the normal process, and in general, I will say on behalf of 650,000 postal workers, get your ballot early and please vote early, and that is just common sense. But if Florida had Florida had a good process, so I'm sure their electoral board procedures were good. We can't do this all by ourselves, so we would appreciate every state's help in reviewing their standards and and taking the advice of the Postal Service General Counsel and what's on our website.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. We now recognize Mr. Clay. If we're still having connection problems, we will be going to Mr. Connolly. Mr. Clay.
Hi, Madam Chair. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
All right. And thank you for conducting this hearing. Mr. DeJoy, let me start with a question. Before you implemented your changes, did you conduct any analysis of the effect your changes would have on delaying prescription drug shipments, the delivery of those shipments to your customer? Did you analyze that before you implemented these changes?
Sir, we have a whole operating organization that I asked to put together a plan, and it wasn't a change. It was comply with your schedules, and when we could comply with with our schedules, I reviewed this with every regional area VP on a discussion that they were ready, and they rolled it out. I'm not the COO, I'm the CEO of the organization, but I received commitment that we would be able to roll forward with the plan on to committing to our existing schedule.
Okay, Mr. DeJoy, let me say this. Prioritizing on-time truck departures means letter carriers leave without all of their packages, including medicine on board. Critical medicines like refrigerated insulin is reportedly sitting in sorting facilities days longer than expected. Did you examine the effect of your changes on medicines like insulin that require special storage?
Sir, at no time did I say don't put the mail on the trucks when they left on time. This was not a hard, direct, everything must leave on time. We still have thousands of trucks a day that leave late within a certain time frame. So the whole, and there are still hundreds of extra trips. So the intention was to put the mail on the trucks and have the trucks leave on time. That should not have impacted anybody.
What about the impact, Mr. DeJoy? What about the impact of missing that insulin and having it sit on the floor somewhere, and it may spoil or whatever? At least we know it will be delayed. Did you all give that any consideration?
We're concerned about the impact to each individual across the country, and we're working extremely hard to bring the service levels back to where they were and to exceed that. And we will be there shortly.
Mr. DeJoy, we would like a copy of any and all analysis you conducted before you implemented your changes. Will you provide them to this committee?
I will go back to the office and see what the operating team has on that, and we'll seek to do so.
Okay, and while you're at it, Mr. DeJoy, do you have any information on the number of prescription drug shipments that the Postal Service has delivered late since you began implementing these changes, and will you provide that information to the committee by the end of the week?
I don't know. I'm not aware of what we have on specific types of shipment. I'm sure we have something. I will take a look at it. But again, I want to remind you that the change is misleading, and what I ask is that the team find a way to run the trucks on the schedule, which the intention was that we put the mail on the trucks when we ran them on schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Clay. And we now
Madam Chairwoman?
Yes.
Could I just ask unanimous consent? Mr. Lynch asked me to enter into the record a set of data from the American Postal Workers Union with respect to mail volume and the reduction in advanced facer canceller systems, delivery bar code sorters, automated flat sorting machine 100s, and flat sequencing systems in its mail processing facilities.
Without objection.
I thank the chair.
Thank you. Mr. Norman from South Carolina is now recognized. Mr. Norman.
Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney. Mr. DeJoy, I just want to apologize to you. You're getting a berating up here. Congressman Lynch going into a 5-minute dialogue would not give you time to answer your questions, was yelling over you. It's typical of how this hearing has gone. And what's amazing to me is this bill had to be rushed out this past Saturday. You remember, do you know that 67 members did not even take the time to show up? If your workers at the post office don't show up, what happens? They don't get a paycheck and the mail doesn't get delivery. It's an insult to what the Democrats are trying to do, a false narrative that has not worked for them since this president was elected. The Mueller report, the impeachment, none of it's working now. They're going fishing for this. I apologize to you. Let me get some yes or no answers. Are you and the Postal Service actively removing mailboxes at the behest of President Trump to undermine the election? Or as President Obama said, kneecap the Postal Service?
No, sir.
Was the U.S. Postal Service going to be insolvent before the election if you did not receive the $25 billion the Democrats insisted in including in their bill?
No, sir.
Is the United States Postal Service equipped to handle voting by mail for the November election?
Yes, sir.
Are you unlocking blue boxes to stop the mail?
Anything with blue boxes is stopped. No. So.
Congressman Palmer showed pictures of the burned out mailboxes and the cities on fire, Portland, Chicago, Minneapolis, Sacramento, New York. Would that kind of slow the post office delivery down?
There are certain actions and procedures that we have for situations for public unrest that we deploy a variety of different things up to and including getting our collection boxes out of there when it happens. But I don't know all of everything that goes with that. But yes, it would slow down the mail.
It slow it down, and the safety of the person delivering the mail is pretty much an issue now, wouldn't it?
I'm sorry?
The welfare of the person delivering mail in the burned out cities would kind of be a problem, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Our letter carriers have, hazardous jobs in many cases.
Were you consulted on this all-important bill that we had to take up this past Saturday to add your expertise?
We've stood up for the rule of law and for our most cherished liberties. This president has seen, with your support, more than 200 men and women confirmed to our federal courts at every level, and they are all conservatives who will uphold the God-given liberties enshrined in our Constitution, like the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, and the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And I couldn't be more proud to be vice president to a president who stands without apology for the sanctity of human life. But today is about 4 more years. This week we will take our case to the American people. And we certainly heard the Democrats' case last week. It's remarkable to think. And you understand when you listen carefully to their agenda, beyond the platitudes and the attitude, you hear an agenda. That Joe Biden and the Democratic Party have been overtaken by the radical left. Their agenda is higher taxes, socialized medicine, open borders, abortion on demand, and cutting funding to the men and women who serve in law enforcement at every level. Well, we're going to take our case to the American people. It's a case of lower taxes, free market economics, secure borders, right to life, and we're going to make it clear that this president, this vice president, and this party will always stand with the men and women who serve on the thin blue line of law enforcement. We're going to back the blue. You know, I don't have to tell you here at the Republican National Convention, the choice in this election has never been clearer, and the stakes have never been higher. And we'll be taking our case to the American people this week, but it'll be you and the millions of Americans involved in our party in every state and territory of this nation who will be carrying that message to the phone lines and to the front doorsteps of the American people. And it's the reason why I wanted to be here today. And it's the reason why I got a good feeling you might just see a friend of mine at the Republican National Convention today. Because we wanted to say thank you. We wanted to say thank you for all the work that you have done and all the work that you will continue to do on the days ahead. In the car on the way here after I landed in Charlotte, I was on the phone with more than 5,000 volunteers all across America. We're going to be getting people together in your state and in every state and territory across this land. We already have the largest grassroots campaign in American history, and we're going to secure 2 million volunteers before Election Day. As it really is about reelecting this president for 4 more years, but it's also about an agenda. It's about an agenda that made America prosperous, more prosperous than ever before this great global pandemic struck our nation. More Americans were working than ever before. We were setting records in this economy left and right. And in the midst of this pandemic, as I'll speak about Wednesday night, the leadership of this president and the compassion of the American people shone forth. And we'll continue to work every day until we put this coronavirus in the past. And when we reelect President Donald Trump, remember it's going to be 4 more years. That means more jobs. 4 more years means more judges. 4 more years means more support for our troops and our cops. And it's going to take at least 4 more years to drain that swamp. So men and women of the Republican National Convention, it's on. Now is the time. This is the moment for each of us to do everything that we can in our power to reelect this president, this team, for 4 more years. But let's also do our part to reelect and elect Republicans up and down the ballot. Let's reelect the Republican majority in the United States Senate, and let's make sure that Leader Kevin McCarthy is Speaker. Kevin McCarthy in a new Republican majority in the United States House of Representatives. So we've all got work to do, and I know you're up to the task. I saw the way this party, this movement, led our nation back in 2016, and I just know each and every one of you are going to do your part this year to reelect this president and elect and reelect Republicans with strong, sound, conservative principles every day. Because, you know, I heard the other day that democracy is on the ballot. But I think we all know the economy is on the ballot. Law and order is on the ballot. Our most cherished ideals of freedom and free markets are on the ballot. That's why we need 4 more years of President Donald Trump in the White House. So I'm going to slip away because I have a feeling somebody else will be here before too long. And as I said, I'll have more to say about the action that you took today come Wednesday night at Fort McHenry. But I mean to tell you, it's the greatest honor of my life to be your vice president. And I'm going to work my heart out to be your vice president for 4 more years. And I'm absolutely convinced that if all of us do all that we need to do between now and November 3rd, if we organize, if we mobilize, if we hit the phones, if we hit the doorsteps, if we do our part in every state and every territory of this country, we're going to elect and re-elect Republican leaders all across this land. We're going to re-elect President.
Been doing it for weeks. 90 some of these people have already called for you to resign. They passed the bill before they even talked to you, before they even had a hearing. They're not interested in a bipartisan solution, as evidenced by the fact the chairwoman wouldn't even contact the White House chief of staff, who had a bill that he worked on with the previous chairman, the late Chairman Cummings, a bipartisan bill to address concerns at the post office. So I'm asking you, why are they after you? First of all, you were appointed by the Board of Governors, right?
I was appointed by unanimous appointment by a bipartisan
Unanimous,
Board of Governors.
unanimous vote, bipartisan, not all Republicans. Democrats thought you were the right guy for the job, right?
Yes, sir.
So why are they out to get you?
I have no idea. I do have a lot of support out there amongst the employees and people in America, though. I receive it every day.
You got an amazing record in business. You got an amazing history of community service. You help kids with their education. You serve your community, serve our country, and these people are out to get you. When all the facts, none of the facts, as the Wall Street Journal said, this is one giant conspiracy from the Democrats. I just want to know what could be their reason. What could it be, Mr. DeJoy? We know it's not based on the facts. What could it be? Might it be politics? Might it be? Might it be the election coming up? Might it be the fact that they actually want to wait and count votes after Election Day? Maybe they want 6 weeks after the election. Maybe they want to be counting votes 6 weeks after the election, the presidential election, the biggest election we're going to have. Maybe they want to be counting votes 6 weeks after, like they did in the chairwoman's race, or 4 weeks after, like they did in New Jersey. Or maybe they want to wait forever like they did in the Democrat Iowa caucuses. Might that be the reason? The chaos and confusion that we saw with all 3 of those elections. Maybe that's what they want. Could that be the reason, Mr. DeJoy?
I don't know what motivates people to have different opinions of me.
Well, they've called you all kinds of names today already. Protesting outside your house. They were there last night, weren't they?
Yes, sir.
Banging pots and pans outside your house, disrupting your neighbors, disrupting you.
Mm-hmm.
When the facts, as you've testified, are not anything close to what they've been saying for the last 3 weeks, what they said Saturday on the House floor. We know what this is about. We all know what this is about. This is about these guys wanting chaos and confusion because I think they know this. I think they know on election night, President Trump's going to win. They know on election day, the vote count on election day, President Trump's going to win. And they want to keep counting. 6 weeks, 4 weeks, Iowa caucus, whenever. I don't know when they decided that one. I still don't know if they've declared a winner. I don't know if it was Bernie or Biden or whoever was running then. That's what they want. And they're willing to go after a guy like you who has served our country, served his community, helps kids with their education, amazing record in business. They're willing to go after you, and you've been on the job 70 days, and everything you've testified is nothing new that's been done by, same thing's been done by other Postmaster Generals, and yet they're coming after you because that's how much they want to get this president. It's disgusting. And we all know what's going on. And the fact that you know it too, you won't say it, I think that shows your character as well, but I'll say it because it's the truth. And the American people understand it and see right through it. I yield back.
The gentleman back, Congressman Krishnawarthi. You're now recognized.
Good morning, Mr. DeJoy.
Good morning.
Before becoming Postmaster General, I believe you appropriately resigned from being the finance chair for the Republican National Convention, correct?
I did, sir.
And I say you appropriately resigned because even in your written testimony, you said we should keep the nonpartisan tradition of the USPS. And in this case, occupying a high-level political post, at the same time you'd be occupying a high-level USPS post, would create at the least appearance problems, if not more, right?
Yes, sir. I also think I couldn't hold both positions.
Yes, sir. Mr. Duncan, are you on the line, sir? Mr. Duncan?
Yes, Congressman.
Yes, sir. As chairman of the board, you are one of the highest ranking officials at the USPS, correct?
As chairman of the board, I am a member of a part-time board that is Senate confirmed.
But you're the chair of the board. You're the highest ranking official at the USPS. I'd like to point out that you are also on the board of 2 Republican super PACs, namely the Senate Leadership Fund and American Crossroads, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I just went to the USPS website, sir, and I looked at your bio, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out on your official government bio at the USPS website, you said, as RNC chairman, he, namely you, raised an unprecedented $428 million and grew the donor base to 1 million, a record at the time. This is on your official government USPS bio. Mr. Duncan, I have a couple other questions for you. In your written testimony, you mentioned that an outside research firm called Russell Reynolds Associates was contracted to find the quote-unquote best person for the job of Postmaster General, correct?
Correct.
You further noted in your testimony that Russell Reynolds reviewed 212 candidates, and then they narrowed the search to 53 after they reviewed those people's bios and backgrounds, and they vetted them, correct?
Yes, sir.
And interestingly, according to David Williams, the former vice chairman of the board, the former inspector general for 13 years at the USPS, as well as a published report over the weekend, Mr. DeJoy was not among the 53 presented to the board. Either one, Russell Reynolds considered Mr. DeJoy and decided there were 53 better candidates than him, or Mr. DeJoy was not considered by Russell Reynolds at all before presenting the 53 finalists. Which was it, Mr. Duncan?
We were still in the process of developing the pool before we had our first round interviews at that point.
I understand. You're talking about the first round interviews, the round of 14. But you don't dispute, obviously, in your answer, that Mr. DeJoy did not make the initial cut of 53 finalists presented to the board, but he was inserted into the round of 14, not by merit, by his connections. It would be the same as an NCAA team not making the round of 64, but then swooping into the round of the Sweet 16. And that's what happened here. So let me ask you this question. Mr. Williams repeatedly asked the board to do a background check on Mr. DeJoy by the Postal Inspection Service. Do you know what the Postal Inspection Service is, sir?
Yes, sir.
And you and the board refused to do that background check. And that was not shared with the board before they voted. Now let me turn to my final set of questions here. Mr. Duncan, you were once quoted in a Republican fundraising letter saying, quote, the Obama-Biden Democrats and their liberal special interest allies are trying to steal their election victories from Republicans. I assume you still believe that about Joe Biden and the Democrats, sir?
I have no knowledge of that.
Yes,
fundraising letter.
It's in the CNN article that quotes you directly right here. And then we have another article from the Las Vegas Sun. It says, again, you wrote in a letter, Democrats will soon be trying to pad their totals at ballot boxes across the country with votes from voters that do not exist. Do you still believe that to be the case, Mr. Duncan?
What are the dates of these letters?
This article is from the Las Vegas Sun from 2008. Do you still believe this,
Yes, sir.
this sentiment?
No, I don't believe anyone at this point who is a nominee of the major parties is trying to steal an election.
Thank you. That would be in contravention of what the president said in a tweet on August 20th. They are trying to steal this election, the Democrats.
The gentleman's time has expired, but the gentleman may answer.
Well, let me respond. There were lots of false premises in this about making the cut. The process worked that we had lots of people who put input, including members of Congress, members of the administration, all of our board members. I think I put in a half a dozen different names. We ran into a period of time after the holidays and when the COVID started that we weren't moving as fast as possible. We got together, we talked about, well, we need to make sure that we have as many candidates as possible because you get a better pool, you get a better choice at the end of that time. It was during that period of time that Mr. DeJoy's interest became, or availability became known to me. I submitted that name as I had many others.
Okay, the gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Massey, Congressman Massey, you're now recognized. Congressman Massey. Congressman Massey, you're now recognized, or we could then go to Mr. Higgins.
Mr. Heiss.
Okay, we have some difficulty. We're going to go to Mr. Roy and come back to Mr. Massey. Mr. Roy.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Can you hear me?
We can't hear you, but we're not seeing you. Now we see you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. Appreciate it. Thanks for the indulgence. Mr. DeJoy, can you answer a couple questions for me? Were you nominated by the President of the United States, or were you selected by a unanimous bipartisan board?
I was selected by a unanimous bipartisan board.
Thank you. A minute ago, my colleague, Mr. Connolly, lamented you have done, quote, 70 days of damage. Yet Mr. Connolly, if I'm not mistaken, has been on this committee for 11 years, chair or ranker of the Government Operations Committee for 7 years. And given that the Oversight Committee held a hearing in April of 2019 about the financial condition of the USPS, why do you think, Mr. DeJoy, that we're having a hearing today, 71 days before an election and 48 hours after we voted on legislation before we had a hearing? Why do you think we're having a hearing today?
I do not know, sir, but I will say that I am surprised at the lack of attention to the financial condition of the Postal Service over the last 10 years.
So you're saying to me that the financial condition of the Postal Service is nothing new, that this is something that we have known has been coming for a long time, and that the Postal Service has lost money for, what, at least 13 consecutive years?
I think 10 years.
Okay. Mr. DeJoy, does the United States Postal Service deliver 8 billion pieces of mail a month, give or take?
Yeah, yes, sir.
And does it have about $14 billion cash on hand to manage the affairs of the Postal Service for right now? Is that right?
Yes, sir.
If every single American voted by mail, which won't happen, by the way, we all know that, it would be less than about 2% of the total mail delivered in a given month, right? In other words, is the USPS perfectly capable of handling any amount of mail that would be attached to our election in November?
We are very ready to handle the election mail, sir.
Mr. DeJoy, do you believe that this hearing to date so far this morning or at any point today will cover any of the following? The PPP extension to ensure small businesses can survive while governments are keeping businesses shut down, the thousands of restaurants, the thousands of live music venues, the thousands of hotels, the thousands of barbershops across the country that are struggling to survive. Is anything in this hearing going to discuss any of that, to the best of your knowledge?
No, sir.
Are you aware of this Democratic Congress pulling up any legislation to deal with these issues this month rather than going home, but yet calling Congress back on Saturday to have a hearing, or I'm sorry, have a vote before we even had a hearing on Saturday. Are you aware of that, or is this the only thing that we've been voting on in August?
I haven't been following the agenda of Congress that much. I've had my own issues to deal with, but I know this
Well, I
is...
appreciate that. There hasn't been that much to follow, so I appreciate that. Are we discussing, for example, human trafficking? Will that be discussed today? I've been asking for a hearing on the scourge of human trafficking, what we can do to stop that. I've been asking for a hearing on that for over a year. We're not having that hearing today, are we? We're having a hearing on this topic. Is that right?
I think we would be sticking to Postal Service matters.
That's right. Look, Mr. DeJoy, I appreciate you being here in front of the committee. I think the fact of the matter is pretty clear. This is a political exercise. This is a show hearing. I've already been seeing out there on social media some of the difficulties in the technology and everything else. The fact of the matter is we're jamming through this for theater. We're doing a hearing on the Monday after a vote on Saturday that has no prayer of becoming law. And this is exactly what the American people are sick of. They want the Postal Service to operate, and you're trying to work on trying to make it operate. We should have hearings about the health and the financial status of the Postal Service. We should work on legislation to improve it. There are bipartisan efforts to do that. We should actually roll our sleeves up and do that work. But by the way, I would say the same thing about the PPP. I was proud to work with Dean Phillips in June to pass bipartisan legislation to help small businesses. Why aren't we doing that right now? Why aren't we doing that today? That is our job. And there are people out there who are struggling. They can't make a check. They can't pay their mortgage. They're wondering whether they're going to have the revenue in order to survive for a business they built up or to be able to employ the people that have worked for them for years. That's what we should be working on, Madam Chairwoman. And I would just posit that this is a waste of time for the United States Congress. The American people are sick of it, and we should be allowing the Postal Service to go back to doing its job here. We should be focusing on doing ours. With that, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding in his comments, and just as a point of information, the Democratic Congress did pass the HEROES Act on May 15th that did fund all kinds of help to people, and that is sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk as well as this bill. So he has a choice. He can move a standalone or he can move the HEROES Act. I now recognize Congressmember Raskin. Mr. Raskin, you are now
Thank you, Madam Chair.
recognized.
I've got diabetic constituents who are waiting for insulin. I've got constituents with cancer waiting for chemo drugs to come in. But this headline really took the cake for me. Rats reported feeding on packages of rotted fruit and meat as Postmaster General's cutbacks unleash chaos at California's mail centers. This is from not some haven of liberal fake news, Business Insider magazine. Mr. Postmaster General, why do you celebrate on-time departure of postal vehicles if the deterioration in service that you regret has caused letters and packages left stacking up in the mail centers? Should we be celebrating vehicles going out on time if they don't have people's packages and letters on them and their prescription drugs?
So we're concerned with every late delivery and every package buildup, and there are a lot of contributing factors to why, and
okay.
where.
And we got your.
But let me finish.
Yeah.
The process is an integral part of delivering the mail and cost effectively.
Okay.
Okay.
President Trump called the post office.
Why would we? The alternative is to run trucks late and run extra trips. Extra trips were empty also. Thousands of them empty.
Okay, forgive me because I've got limited time. I can't allow you to filibuster here. President Trump called the post office a joke. Is it a joke?
Postal Service is not a joke.
Mr. Joy, if I wanted to become a letter carrier or a mail handler, a postal clerk, would you hire me without a background check?
We have a process that I do believe includes a background check, so no.
Yeah, it's compelled, right? Everybody's got to take a background check, except they didn't have one for you.
That's not true. I had background checks.
You did have a background check? So
background checks. I got secret clearance. I had FBI background checks. I've had everything.
Okay, so you would be willing to release the background check?
No. Why would I release a background check?
Well, that's interesting. Let me go to Mr. Duncan about that. Mr. Duncan, would you be willing to allow Russell Reynolds to turn over the file from this process? Mr. Duncan? All right, well, let me come back to you, Mr. DeJoy. The former chairman of the Postal, vice chairman of the Postal Board of Governors, Mr. Williams, who was also the Inspector General, also reported that you didn't come through the normal Russell Reynolds interview process, but you were apparently the product of different nominations by different political people. And the astonishing thing about what he said last week was that when you finally were brought in for that first interview, you basically interviewed the selection panel rather than them interviewing you, to the point that one of the members joked that they had better ask you at least one question so that it couldn't be said that it wasn't a real interview. Now, you were also reported stating that you weren't sure that you wanted to accept the job and you needed to essentially interview them about what it entailed. What gave you the confidence that the job was basically yours for the asking when you finally met the selection committee?
Sir, I did not think the job was mine for the asking. I don't know what Mr. Williams' contention is or what his problem is with me.
He was the Inspector General for 13 years at the Postal Service and the Vice Chair. Well,
he's authored probably part of the reports that have been stacking up that this committee hasn't done.
Well, what do you make of the former chairman of the Postal Board of Governors, Mr. Feynman, calling Treasury Secretary Mnuchin's involvement in the selection process absolutely unprecedented?
Stephen Mnuchin had nothing to do with my selection. Okay, I was called by Russell.
Did you talk to Secretary Mnuchin about taking the job? There was a report that you had lunch together to discuss this.
It's totally inaccurate and outrageous.
You've never talked to him about, but before taking the job, you never talked to him about taking the job?
I talked to him about the job after I received the offer. I did not accept the offer immediately.
Okay, but you never spoke to him before about his soliciting your interest in the job, or?
He did not solicit any interest. I kept my interest, which as you identified, I did not know that I had an interest. I had a perfectly good life prior to this, but I was interested in helping, and I was called by Russell Reynolds out of the blue.
One of the reasons that we have background checks, and I'll be very interested with your permission and Mr. Duncan's permission to see your background check, is that we identify patterns of misconduct or potential conflicts of interest that are out there. Now, you had...
Sir, I have no patterns of misconduct in my
Let me finish my question if I could.
Madam Chair,
one of your businesses was called New Breed Logistics, later XPO Logistics, which has contracts with the Postal Service stretching back many years. Okay, well, the question is, they identified problems with contract performance and billing practices in the contract file. Would you consent to releasing that contract file so everyone can see what your business?
I don't even know what you're speaking about.
Are you not aware of XPO Logistics, which?
I am aware of XPO.
Okay, so do you have $30 million invested?
Time, Madam Chair. He's gone way over his time.
Do you have $30 million invested?
He doesn't.
I have a significant investment in XPO Logistics, which I vetted before with the ethics department of the Postal Service, and I was given specific types of guidelines that I needed to adhere to. It's a very, very small part of the Postal Service business I have nothing to do with. And I comply with all ethical requirements, and we have an OIG investigation. I guess they'll get to everything that you're interested in, and we will see what will happen.
Well,
Mr. Raskin's time has expired.
It looks like we're taking a brief recess.
The recess is over. We are now back to work, and our next Representative Massey, you are now recognized.
Okay, Madam Chairwoman, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can't see you, but we
Okay.
can hear you.
Uh-oh, you can't see me.
Okay, turn on your,
Can you?
there you are, there you are. We see you and we can hear you, okay?
Okay.
Mr. Massey is now
All right.
recognized.
Okay, Madam Chairwoman, I ask unanimous consent to submit to the record two press releases from the U.S. Post Office. The first one's from April 28, 2011. The second one is from February 23, 2012.
Without objection.
All right, I want to read some excerpts from these press releases and then ask Chairman Duncan to respond to the press releases because these are from Kentucky. In 2011, the Post Office announced, and I'll read this, as a result of a study begun in September 2010, the Postal Service has made the decision to move mail processing operations from the Ashland Processing and Distribution Facility to the Charleston, West Virginia Processing and Distribution Facility. What this means is here in Eastern Kentucky, when we mail our next door neighbor, the envelope goes to Charleston, West Virginia before it comes back to our next door neighbor. I want to read from this other press release from the U.S. Post Office, the Kentuckiana District. It says, and this is February 23rd, 2012, as a result of studies begun 5 months ago, the Postal Service has made the decision to move all mail processing operations from Bowling Green, Kentucky, moved to Nashville, Compton, Kentucky, Elizabethtown, Kentucky, Hazard, Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky. Our second largest city lost their mail processing facility in 2012. Paducah, Kentucky moved to Evansville, Indiana, and Somerset, Kentucky, Knoxville, Tennessee. So this was in 2012. This was an election year, and this was while Obama was president and Biden was vice president. I want to read a quote from Chief Operating Officer Megan Brennan at the time. The decision to consolidate mail processing facilities recognizes the urgent need to reduce the size of the national mail processing network to eliminate costly underutilized infrastructure. Consolidating operations is necessary if the Postal Service is to remain viable to provide mail service to the nation. Now, the Democrats have cooked up this conspiracy theory that the Post Office is now somehow going to be at fault for disenfranchising voters or suppressing votes because, and the media is complicit in this. They've shown video of mail sorting equipment being moved out of facilities. Well, here I've just mentioned 10 facilities in Kentucky that were shut down in an election year. And so I want to ask Chairman Mike Duncan, Mr. Duncan, do you believe this in 2012 was part of some conspiracy to disenfranchise voters in the 2012 election or part of some conspiracy to keep people from getting their medication or Social Security checks?
Congressman, I have no knowledge of a conspiracy that would keep people from voting or getting their Social Security checks, but as a resident of that area, I know that it's added to the number of days it takes to send or receive a letter.
Right, and you, I believe you know the Chief Operating Officer Megan Brennan. She was the CEO in 2010 and then became Postmaster General. Do you question her motives in the course of these operations?
No, I worked very closely with Megan Brennan when she was the chief of this organization. She has great integrity. She knows the system. She's been an operations person. She was a letter carrier. She worked her way up. She leads Post Office Blue.
And she has a business degree from MIT, I would add. So this wasn't a part of any kind of conspiracy then. It was a part of realigning the infrastructure of the post office to the changing needs of the U.S. customer. And I just want to close by highlighting some irony and hypocrisy. Postmaster General DeJoy, how long will the post office be funded if there's no more transfers of cash to the post office? How long can you operate?
Sir, would you turn on your mic, please?
Late 2021.
Okay, late 2021. So at least for one more year. I hope that members of this committee are aware that the U.S. government ceases to be funded on September 30th of this year. So we're holding a hearing about a post office that's funded for fully another year. Meanwhile, we're not even in town because Speaker Pelosi isn't concerned that government funding ends on September 30th. Everything but the post office shuts down on September 30th at midnight if we don't do something. Also, one other element of irony and hypocrisy, our Democratic governor shut down 95% of the voting precincts in the state, and now Democrats are somehow trying to blame the post office for disenfranchising voters. And with that, I will yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We now recognize Congressman Ruda.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Let's level set for the thick-headed individuals that don't understand why we are here today. Let me sum it up for you. First and foremost, mail is being delivered late at the expense of those who need prescriptions, at the expense of small businesses who need the supplies to stay in business or reopen for business, for Social Security recipients and veterans who need their benefits. That's the first reason. The second reason, we got a president of the United States who says that mail-in ballots are fraudulent, and if he doesn't win the election, it's because it was fraudulent. We know that's not true. We know that's a lie, and that lie continues to be continued by members in this committee on the other side of the aisle. Third, we know from a memo from Mr. DeJoy to 46 states telling them they should be worried about receiving mail-in ballots to their voters on time and for them to be returned back in time to be counted. And fourth, we're here because the United States Postal Service has requested financial help from this institution. Let me turn to my questions. Unlike any private enterprise, the Postal Service has a universal service obligation to deliver mail to virtually every address in the United States, regardless if it's profitable or not. The Postal Service also has a ridiculous mandate to pre-fund in 10 years' time 75 years of retiree health benefits, unlike any other private or public institution. Mr. DeJoy, in your testimony, you stated that you are against the pre-funding mandate. The Trump-appointed Board of Governors, postal workers, and senators on both sides of the aisle are against that mandate. As you know, there is a bipartisan bill sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk that would eliminate the pre-funding mandate and free up tens of billions of dollars for the U.S. Postal Service. Here's some free business advice. Pick up the phone, please call Mitch McConnell, because one vote and one stroke of a pen by this president would free up billions of dollars for the U.S. Postal Service to be able to accomplish the opportunity to revitalize that organization for decades to come. I have some questions about your business plan. It's standard practice as an executive to come in, meet with your team, and develop a strategic plan before executing operational changes. This was the plan that was released in May, just before you became Postmaster General. Did you make any written modifications to this plan since you have taken office?
No, first of all, sir, you're incorrect in my position on the pre-funding of the health care. In my written statement that
I know you support it.
I support it.
Yes, I said that. Yes, you do support it. I recognize that. But back to my question, have you made any modifications to this business plan?
Well, I'm working on making modifications to that business plan.
Yes, in fact, on August 13th, developing a strategic plan to achieve operational excellence and financial stability. Is that plan that you're working on, would it usurp this plan?
If approved by the Board of Governors, it would. And I must add, we do need to identify that the legislation also requires the Postal Service to be self-sustaining, and it has not been self-sustaining for the last.
And that's why getting rid of the pre-mandate is so important. But I just want to make sure that we are working under a written plan of some kind. If you have made any written modifications in memos to team members, will you provide this committee with that information so we know how you have modified this 5-year plan?
When we come out with a plan,
well, surely you've got memoranda and other documents floating around, right? You can give us a draft, can't you?
I would not.
You can't give us a draft? I mean, we just got the report with the KPI showing that you're down 10% nationally when we know that in battleground areas it's down even more. So you were able to get that to us late. Can you get us that information as requested?
Probably not.
Let me ask you this. Let's turn to the impact you have had with the internal communications that show senior managers not to even plug in the previously disconnected machines without approval from headquarters. Mail processing equipment and blue collection boxes will remain where they are. Will you tell your workers and the American public right now that USPS employees can plug in disconnected machines?
I'm unaware of the directive that you're speaking about.
Well, it's an internal communication from the
six.
USPS. So you will then allow them to plug in machines to be able to do their job.
I'm not going to agree to something I'm unaware of or the memo that you speak.
But you know how absolutely insane this is. This is like telling Jamba Juice they can't plug in the blenders to do their job.
Well, there must be a reason. I didn't do it, but the organization has.
But you're the head of the unit. You're the head of the business. The buck stops with you.
The buck on what machine gets plugged in? That's an outrageous statement.
The fact that you're down over 10% nationally in service
It has nothing to
metrics.
do with a plugged-in machine anywhere.
Gentleman's time
I
has
yield back.
expired. The
Thank you,
gentleman
Madam
can
Chair.
answer the question if the. We now recognize Congressman Brocana. Oh, excuse me, Heiss. Congressman Heiss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will just bring up, Madam Chair, if I may, the fact that you allowed Mr. Raskin to go significantly over his time while at the same time cutting off Mr. Roy is not going unnoticed. And I think Mr. Roy's point regarding the HEROES Act, that it was $3.4 trillion of swamp spending and did not even extend the PPP, which was what it was supposed to do. But what the HEROES Act did include was universal mail-in ballots, no voter ID for all those ballots, ballot harvesting. It's funny to me that the HEROES Act, which was supposed to be about COVID help and relief, did not extend PPP, but it did have a whole lot of voting reform in it that actually brings us into the conversation here today. Mr. DeJoy, let me just, I think you would agree with me, would you not, that the sanctity of the voting box, the ballot box, is a paramount issue for Americans. Would you agree?
Yes, sir.
And I'm sure all of us would. Now, in 2017, there was an investigation by the Office of Special Counsel that concluded that the United States Postal Service improperly coordinated with the Postal Workers Union in support of Hillary Clinton. And the investigation, the OSC's investigation, went on and stated that it was a systematic violation of the Hatch Act that was involved. And in fact, many postal workers were required to work overtime to make up for the absence of all of that. It is also very interesting that the union we are referring to is the National Association of Letter Carriers, which just 10 days ago endorsed Biden for president. Let me ask you, how many fraudulent votes are necessary for it to be considered too many?
I don't know, sir. I guess one.
I would say one. We don't want fraudulent votes. There's no reason for us to have that. Your predecessor, Ms. Brennan, committed to Congress to fully implement some of the recommendations, in fact, all the recommendations from OSC to avoid future Hatch violations. So I'd like to ask you, what kind of changes have you made to prevent these type of violations from taking place in the future?
Congressman, that is not a focus I've had in my 70 days, but I will take a look at the status of that initiative and get back to you.
Okay, I would appreciate you getting back with us. You know, there's no question in my mind that the vast majority of USPS workers are faithful workers. They're honest, dedicated public servants. But that being said, what the OSC has identified is, without question, many cases of political bias. And in fact, just lay this out, when you have a union that consists of 300,000 workers, and that union comes out and endorses a candidate, in this case Biden, and then that union is supposed to be expected to accurately handle and deliver ballots to both parties fairly, does that raise any concerns for you at all?
Sir, I respect everybody's right to support candidates and donate to candidates. I have done so myself for 20 years, so in my mind, it doesn't raise any awareness on the concern with regard to postal workers and their initiatives.
I respect the rights of individuals too.
The Postal Service has 650,000 people, and we will have, like the rest of the American society, we will have people that don't pay attention to the laws. But for the most part, I believe in the ability to donate and support.
Thank you for your answers. Thank you for your answers, and I respect the right for people to vote and support who they want to as well. But this is a case where you have 300,000 workers, a union that has endorsed Biden, and there must be in place some sort of mechanism to ensure that the handling of those ballots and all political material, election material, is properly handled and not in a biased way. And I look forward to you responding to us in the next week or so.
Yes,
I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Congressman Rokana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. DeJoy, for being here. I want to see if we can find some common ground to resolve some of the differences. Can you begin by sharing with the American people and this committee the unofficial motto of the Postal Service?
No rain nor snow, that sleet nor hail will make our delivery.
Yes. It's about service, correct? Not about profit.